fine. Yeah, so Platypus is an international student group. We host panel events like this, and reading groups, film screenings, and we publish the Platypus Review. Unfortunately, we've only got a few copies because we're running low here in London, but as a group, we started in 2006 in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute and the University of Chicago there, with a group of students there, and then we now have groups in New York, Toronto, Halifax, London, Frankfurt, Germany, and Thessaloniki in Greece, and some sort of efforts in Kosovo as well, although it's early stages there. So our main work is simply to host conversation about what it means to be on the left today. We're not exactly a kind of party organisation or I don't know, some other kind of campaigning group. Our main activity is to host discussions, and hopefully they're sort of clarifying. Our sort of slogan is, though, slightly provocative in the left is dead, long live the left. And I guess it is meant to be slightly provocative, but we're also trying to come to a greater understanding of how the left in the history of the left and where we are today, and that through bringing together very different contrasting perspectives, we can sort of bring about hopefully both clarification of points of disagreement, but also uncover unexpected agreements as well. And the work is towards transforming the left into a revolutionary force to overcome capitalism towards socialism. I think we'll start with our event tonight. I'm very, very pleased to have our speakers here. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to just read through the panel description that we put together in coming up with this debate. Radical Ideologies Today, Marxism and Anarchism. So the panel description is as follows. It seems that there are only two radical ideologies, anarchism and Marxism. They emerge out of the same crucible, the Industrial Revolution, the unsuccessful revolutions of 1848 and 1871, a weak liberalism, the centralization of state power, the rise of the workers' movement, and the promise of socialism. They are the revolutionary heritage, and all significant radical upsurges of the last 150 years have returned to mine their meaning for the current situation. In this respect, our moment seems no different. There are a few different ways these ideologies have been taken up. Recent worldwide square occupations reflect one pattern, a version of Marxist theory, understood as a political economic critique of capitalism, used to comprehend the world, whilst an anarchist practice understood as an anti-hierarchical principle that insists revolution must begin now, is used to organise in order to change it. Some resist this combination, claiming that Marxism rejects anti-statist adventurism and call for a strategic reorganisation of the working class to resist austerity and perhaps push forward a new New Deal. This view remains wedded to a supposedly practical welfarist social democracy, which strengthens the state and manages capital. There is a good deal of hand-waving in both of these orientations with regard to politics, tactics, and the end goal. Finally, there have been attempts to leave the grounds of these theories entirely, but these often seem either to land right back in one of the camps or remain marginal. To act today, we seek to draw up a balance sheet of the 20th century. The historical experience concentrated in these ideas must be unfurled if they are to serve as compass points. To see in what ways the return of these ideologies represent an authentic engagement, and in what ways the return of a ghost. Where have the battles left us? What forms do we have for meeting, theoretically and practically, the problems of our present? So just to introduce our panellists that we have here. John Sinha is active within Occupy London and Occupy Democracy. He made the open call in April of this year to Occupy London for the occupation of Parliament Square, which has taken place later this year in October. And again, another occupation, I believe, is happening this weekend. He has considerable activist experience since the 1990s with Reclaim the Streets and other anti-globalisation struggles, including Climate Camp in the mid-2000s, and he's also a member of the SWP. Tony Wood. Welcome, Tony.
Sorry,
We're just getting started, that's fine. Tony Wood is a community organiser, a member of Haringey Solidarity Group, and one of the London Anarchist Bookfair collective. Iain McKay is an author of An Anarchist FAQ and a regular contributor to Black Flag magazine. Dan Morley is a member of the International Marxist Tendency, who has made a study of anarchism and Marxist theory, which can be read on their website. And Mark Osborn is a member of the Alliance for Workers' Liberty. So I'm going to give the speakers 8 minutes each to kind of present their thoughts, then a couple of minutes each to respond to each other, and then we'll open up for audience Q&A. So I think we'll probably we can go along from left to right. So I'll start with John.
Okay. Actually, my political involvement started even earlier than Reclaim the Streets. I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. And I suppose you could describe my politics at the time as being a liberal. I mean, I think people might not remember the 80s, but the struggle against apartheid was one of those kind of defining political struggles. I think it's equivalent to the Palestine solidarity movement today. In many ways, it's got a lot in common with it. And I got involved through student through the campus activism, boycotts of banks like Barclays, who were heavily involved in South Africa. And that's the start of my political activity. I know things like trying to burn down the South African embassy. It's one of the first demos I went to was in October '94, where a group of us tried to set fire to it, but unfortunately we only had some newspapers, not enough petrol, so it stayed that way. So yeah, that's my beginning of my political involvement. How I got involved with the SWP it's basically I wouldn't say it was for political reason. It was I was 18 at the time, and it had the best social scene, I suppose, and that's probably the way most young people get involved in political groups, is via the social aspect. And I suppose I suppose it was an accident, really, because there was a woman I fancied was in the group, so I joined it in order to get her attention. And she ended up leaving, and I ended up staying. So that's how I got involved. From the age of 17, 18. Now, when we talk about, what's in my lifetime of activism, which I'm now in my late 40s, what I've seen the rise of, what we call the movement against neoliberal globalization in the 90s. At the same time, we had, big street movements. When I joined, it was a period of enormous defeat for the working class. We had in 1985 the defeat of the miners' strike, which had an enormous impact on people's views. It was the high point of Thatcherism, and really, in many ways, what has been going on is basically, I see, neoliberalism has simply been continuing and accelerating for the past 30 years, and the left hasn't been very good at putting forward alternatives which can relate to the mass of working people. I mean, you would have thought after the financial crisis in 2008, when a lot of people were sort of acquiring new interest in reading Marx to better understand the crisis of capitalism, you thought, well, maybe it's the time, now it's the turn of the left to actually to rise and to actually put forward an alternative. The capitalism had shown itself that it had, how destructive and wasteful it was, and how, the neoliberal promises of the Blair years, how they'd all turned to dust. And you'd have thought, well, now's the time for a realignment and an opportunity for the left to actually build some, big force that can actually offer an alternative. But I don't think that's really happened. We've had, throughout Europe, left groups are fragmented, divided, are not able to put forward an alternative, and the groups that are, able to, are putting forward a populist message tends to be the right. So in the UK, part of the crisis is the rise of UKIP, which has got an even harder line, is even more for austerity, is even more for privatisation, and is bringing out a really nasty discourse about immigration. And the question is, what does the left do? I mean, I'm, for one, am not terribly interested in getting into arguments with other people on the left about which organisation is the best one, because I think, to a certain extent, they've all failed. I think the organisations of the traditional revolutionary left, I think anarchist groups, all of them, you can criticise all of them, because they haven't been able to, none of them have been able to put forward an analysis and organise in a way that actually can build movements which are strong enough to resist neoliberalism. I mean, at the moment there are some small hopeful signs. There is, a few small sparks of resistance. So we've seen recently things like, the E15 mothers, over the question of gentrification. There are a few small things, but it simply isn't enough I don't think it's enough to turn the tide, and we need something much bigger. And one of the things I'm involved in is Occupy Democracy. I think that is actually putting the question of democracy right at the front of the whole issue, because the argument we're putting forward there is that, and it's an argument that probably 90% of the British population would agree with, is that things like NHS privatisation or the tripling of tuition fees have been imposed without any democratic mandate. Nobody voted for NHS privatisation. It wasn't in any election manifesto. The Westminster elite simply cobble up an agreement, and they think they can simply ignore the voters. And we need to challenge that. And I think the question of democracy should be essential for anyone on the left to say that Parliament, this system doesn't work for us, it doesn't represent us, we need alternatives. And the time for that, I think, is right. We can see in Scotland with the referendum campaign, people rejecting the Westminster system of government. It's not just austerity people are rejecting, they're rejecting the whole system in Westminster, and they're looking for alternatives. And I think it's time now people on the left put forward alternatives of how we can have real democracy now.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was John Sinha. Now we'll have Mark Osborn from AWL.
Okay, so I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to say, so I thought I'd listen to what people said and just respond. So the comrade here started with his biography. I mean, I must admit that the idea that you could sit in a meeting in a university in London and say the reason that you joined a political organisation was because you fancied somebody is just ridiculous. And actually, it's just ridiculous. Look, you join political organisations because you're political and because you agree with them. So I became a Trotskyist 31 years ago. I joined my organisation because I agreed with it after a period of a couple of years of clarification. It's a political matter. It's not who you want to sleep with, right? I mean, the idea that you have to even begin your speech in the 21st century also kind of highlights a problem with what the left has come to at the moment, right? The rejection of of serious political discourse, of discussion about big ideas, right? First and foremost. I mean, I'm just thinking about what you said. I can't actually think about any big ideas you gave me. You talked about, for example, the thing you ended with was about the referendum in Scotland. I mean, you said that people are rejecting the Westminster system. In the name of what? In the name of erecting another barrier between, in this case, between Scots and English and Welsh, right? Generally, our programme is for the abolition of borders. I want to see less borders, not more, right? It's defining politics about what he's against and not what he's for, and I'll come back to that in a minute because I think we need to consider why that is. But just think back. I was thinking back to when I joined my organisation. I joined at Manchester University in 1983, and at that time my Labour Club had 500 members. Right? It was enormous. It included two people who are scumbags, who are quite well known now, Phil Wallace and John Mann. Phil Wallace was recently kicked out of being a Labour MP. John Mann is currently a Labour MP. Some of the most ridiculous people I've ever met in my life. Right? It was an enormous club, however. The far left was a revolutionary organisation. One of the things that was interesting about that organisation, it was heavily political. You know, you could go each week and you could have a discussion about big politics, about the Falklands War, about women's liberation, about gay liberation, about anything more or less you wanted, right? There was a proper political culture where discussion and debate about big ideas was important and central. You compare that to what happened at Goldsmiths yesterday, and I'm a teacher down the road, but my partner's at Goldsmiths. So I came down here to see if I could have a look at your general meeting yesterday, and I was stood outside the door because I wasn't allowed in. And you had a situation whereby the general meeting, which was 40 or 50 people, I mean, you know, not 500 people, 40 or 50 people, out of a population of 8,000 students, something like that, in Goldsmiths, right, was debating a motion to get rid of the SWP, which you didn't even mention, and which you didn't even turn up to defend, right? If an organisation is worth joining, it is when it is being banned on this campus, you turn up and you defend it. You didn't say, you haven't said anything about this, right? What kind of political culture is this? So there's a discussion, a vague discussion about banning the SWP. I wasn't in the meeting, so I can't comment on the precise details. I do know, however, in the end, the people that won the debate about banning the SWP and did ban the SWP on this campus, and shame on them, they should be in favour of free speech and free and open debate. Right? You want to talk about something that's important to both anarchism and the real libertarian Marxist tradition, it's open, free debate and discussion. Right? Shame on them for doing that. They came out of the meeting, and then now on YouTube you can witness them burning apparently an AWL leaflet, a Workers' Liberty leaflet, which advocated free speech on campus, not to ban the SWP. Somebody had to do it. They didn't do it themselves, right? And in an attempt to intimidate other people on the left, right? You know, the contrast in my mind between what happened when I was an undergraduate, the discussions I was capable of having, and the loss in political culture now is enormous, debilitating. It's awful, right? Okay, so I'm going to try and address some of the political points because the meeting's about anarchism and socialism. It's difficult having the discussion because just as there are plenty of people that call themselves Trotskyists on this platform, frankly, if they're Trotskyists, I'm not. Right? There are plenty of different strands of anarchism in the same way as there's plenty of different strands of socialism. There is plenty of anarchists that I feel a great affinity with. So, for example, the people that set up My Tendency in the 60s had enormous respect for revolutionary syndicalists they worked with on the docks in Salford and in Liverpool. They thought they were great people. They had the central concern that I have, the absolute centrality of the majority class in British society, the working class, the industrial working class central to that, right? That's my central concern, right? Shading off right at the other end, miles away, into right-wing people who are bothered about organic vegetables mainly because they're bothered about what they consume, not what anybody else consumes. So I'm keen on some anarchists. Oh dear. I'm kind of less keen on others. I think that, however, what you've seen amongst the people that call themselves anarchists, recently especially, notice the name Reclaim the Streets, the Zapatista tradition is a kind of willingness to kind of withdraw from politics, to retreat from class, to retreat from the idea that you can confront the ruling class, the capitalist class in Britain. You can transform society. You can confront it. You can kind of advocate an alternative narrative, an alternative set of political policies, an alternative set of ideas into a retreat towards, a squat, setting up your own kind of little kind of isolated kind of world of communism in a squat or a you do I don't know, you have an allotment or something like that, and you create your own right on space. That's what the people who banned the SWP were doing last night. They're creating little tiny right on space in Goldsmiths, right, which is intolerant of everybody else, right, but is fine for them for the time being. Unfortunately, I actually want to still transform the world. I have a project of human liberation which involves going and talking to workers that vote for BNP, yeah, which involves engaging and struggling and fighting for a different world, right? Okay,
Can I ask a point of clarification?
In a second you can.
No, it's about the point you made about...
In a second you can.
You suggested...
In a second you can.
Okay.
Right? And I'd be I'll be happy to answer you, but in a second, yeah? I want to maintain the idea of working class agency, of the big majority in society, the working class majority, as against lots of the anarchist strands, and again, I'm not treating anarchists in one big group, but a lot of the anarchist strands who look at the very marginal groups. I remember that the We Are Everywhere collective talked about the clowns, the squatters, the asylum seekers, the shoplifters, the fast food workers. I want to get back to the big majority agency that can kind of transform society, right? And I want to get away from this kind of intolerant aspect, which includes the anarchists, right? Which is I can do anything that's good for me, right? We must recognise the need for open, free debate and discussion. In Goldsmith, centrally, because of what happened yesterday to the SWP in the first instance, we must stand against that. Part of the reason I'm speaking at a forum like this is because the debate is good, right? Full stop, pretty much, right? So let's get on with it. I'll take your point of clarification if you like.
You seem to suggest that the people who had passed the motion to ban SWP were anarchists. Is that the case?
No, I think...
No, I think implied that they were.
No. I think there were some people. Well, I think the people that the problem with anarchism at the moment is there are plenty of people who are not anarchists, who call themselves anarchists, partly because they want to distinguish themselves from the SWP, the Labour Party and stuff like that. It's a kind of trendy banner. But actually, for a serious anarchist, it's actually problematic, because a serious anarchist will think about the state, about liberty, about human freedom in a way that a lot of these people won't.
And so the answer is no, then?
Well, no. The answer isn't just simply no. The answer just simply isn't no, right? The answer is some of them probably were, right, in a general sense. Right?
We can come back to that. Tony.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry I was late. A lefty with papers. I'm involved in the Anarchist Bookfair. I'm also involved in a local group called How Engaged Solidarity Group, and if people want to know what that means, I've just bought some. They're free. I'm not pushing them on anyone, in case people want to know what they are. Right, I've got 8 minutes. When Lucy's first asked us to speak, she gave me, and I presume everyone else here, a number of questions. There's far too many to get through in what I thought was going to be 10 or 15 minutes, which is now 8 minutes. So things like the contradictions or the differences between Marxists and anarchists, I'm going to leave for other people to speak about. In a way, like John, it doesn't interest me. I don't want to spend time arguing about it. And when we're on the streets in Haringey or wherever, most of the people we're working with and talking to don't know what the words mean, don't know what the theories are, and actually those few who do just wonder why the fuck we just moan at each other and argue with each other and don't get on with sort of what we should be doing. So I'm not going to talk about that. One of the other questions was also about the square occupations that have been going on around the world. I've never been involved in them. I haven't researched them. I can't talk about them. Other people can, maybe. So, after the last guy, I suppose I should put my cards on the table. I would call myself a class struggle anarchist. I don't have much time for politicians and political parties, be they the present ones or revolutionary ones. I've never really seen any leader give up their power, even those that claim they're going to. And I just don't think it would happen. I think power corrupts and it's enticing and lovely, and I don't think people should have it. So I think when we organise, we have to organise from non-hierarchical ways, but non-hierarchical ways that are effective and work. And I'd also say I really don't want to pick up guns and I don't want to be violent, but if we have a revolution, I can't see the people in charge giving up their privileges that easy. So unfortunately, when I talk about revolution, I think it's going to get bloody and we have to be prepared for what that means. So that's me putting the cards on the table. What I do want to talk about is organising, really, and how we go forward, because I think the left, all of the left, has been shattered. You know, I call myself a class struggle anarchist, and I think we have to get organised, and I don't mean organised with each other and talking to each other. I would like to see street level autonomous groups everywhere in the country where those people who live on a street or an estate or however you want to define it actually have control and make the decisions in that small area. I think they should be open for everyone that lives there, and I think all those streets, if we're going to have it on a street level organising way, should be federated so that when there's a bigger issue we have delegates going to a bigger area and they work out what happens in that area. And I would take that, you know, obviously at some point I want to get rid of nations, but for ease of terminology at the moment, I would have that nationally and I would have that internationally. Likewise, I think we've got to have autonomous workers groups in every workplace. Now, if people want to call that a trade union or a collective, call it what you want. What I mean is all the workers in a workplace coming together to organise in that workplace. And I'm talking about the short term for the moment, and I think they have to have total control over their workplace and the organising and the fight back. And that means shop stewards, union officials, the bigwigs, all have to follow the lead of the workers in the workplace. I would add one thing, that I think there should be no bosses in that autonomous collection. I just don't think it works. But I think all workers should be in it, whether they're on the factory floor, whether they're a computer programmer, whether it's a cleaner, a porter. I was going to say dinner lady. Do you actually get dinner men in school nowadays as well? But dinner, you know...
Yeah, you do.
Don't have dinner at schools.
No.
Anyway, right, I've only got 8 minutes. We'll come back to that one. So yeah, but obviously in the long term, I want to move it further than that. I don't just want workers organising together to take on the bosses. I want all workplaces to be controlled by the workers. So I want to get rid of all the bosses. Not an easy task, I know, but I think we need to work towards it. And I mean all workplaces. You know, I don't just mean factories. I mean things like universities and schools, and I call the workers the lecturers, but I also call them the cleaners, and I think they need to work with students, be they school students or whatever. I've got 2 minutes left. Right. Well, I was going to go on. All right. 2 minutes, and I haven't got enough time. So there was one of the other questions was saying, should we ask for more state or less state? As an anarchist, in the long run, I want less state. Nearly got that wrong, didn't I? I want less state. Obviously, I want to get rid of the state. But I think in the short term, the working class have been so downtrodden and so beaten back for the last God knows how many years. I think any victory is worth fighting for. So I think if workers are coming together and they're arguing for better health and safety, even though they're using legislation, if workers are fighting for it and they get it, you get a buzz from that victory. And once you've got a victory, you want to go forward and do other stuff. Likewise, in a community, if someone's fighting against health cuts, it's fighting for more state. But when you fight and win, you get that sweet taste of success. And then you start fighting more. And you want to take up bigger and bigger things. And that's when I think people start realising the state is wrong and you move forward. I had a load of other stuff I was going to say, but I'm not going to. One last thing. One of the other questions said, I think it was, is anarchism or Marxism, how is Marxism or anarchism done today and succeeded? For me, I think they've both failed. The only sort of political theory that seems to be working at the moment is capitalism. And I fucking hate capitalism. And I really want, as an anarchist, I want to see an anarchist society. But we've been beaten down and we're losing, and we need to get that back and think how we do it. And the one thing I just really don't want to do is people on the left just spend weeks and hours moaning at each other and fighting each other when actually there's thousands of people out there that don't know the fuck what we're on about, and we need to be out there working alongside them. And that's where I'll stop.
Okay, thanks. And Iain.
Okay, thanks. Again, as per the last speaker, there's quite a long list that I'm not going to cover in 8 minutes. Buy some books, we'll go into more details. Black Flag is really good. So, where to start? Okay, there's a very good point. Is I would dispute the idea of an anarchist ideology, because like a political theory is where you have ideas, an ideology is where ideas have you. And you can see that from this discussion. By any objective standard, Marxism has failed big time. I mean, it's basically, if you look at every single Marxist movement, either resulted in reformism or produced a very nasty party dictatorship presiding over a state capitalist economy. And basically, if you look at the sort of scorecard of the 20th century, basically Marxism tells you what not to do. And I should also point out that this was not being done, we're not saying this will benefit of hindsight. Anarchists predicted this. Bakunin in the First International argued that basically there's two possibilities. Either you go into the route of political action, stand in elections, go the social democratic route, you end up becoming a reformist. If you do have a situation of seizing power, the very nature of the state, a top-down, centralised bureaucratic organisation, regardless of its initial setup, will become the new ruling class, and the workers will become a new subject class, this time to the party leadership and to the state bureaucracy. Both of those predictions came true. Bakunin also suggested an alternative, which is basically build working class power at the point of production. Organise in your workplaces, federate your workplaces together. Use the strike, use direct action, use solidarity, general strike, insurrection to change the world. He also argued, and so did Kropotkin, about the need for community groups. Like anti-poll tax groups, for example. I mean, I was in the anti-poll tax movement, and we had community groups all across the country. Unfortunately, the leadership was controlled by militant then, and the net effect was, rather than build an anti-parliamentarian movement, they used it to build their party. And it turned a direct action movement into an electioneering movement, and we know what happened, it disappeared. So a great potential, one of the victories we need, wasted due to basically Marxist ideology. Areas like the Han-Gay Solidarity Group came out of the anti-poll tax movement, didn't it? That's an example of what could have been. In areas where anarchists were strong, we did it in Edinburgh, we did it elsewhere, build community groups. That potential was lost. I mean, in terms of this discussion, for example, I mean, the ideas like anarchism versus socialism is just bollocks. Anarchists are socialists. They've always been socialists. Proudhon called himself a socialist. Bakunin, Kropotkin, they all called themselves socialists. It's not socialism and anarchism. It was
Marxism
and anarchism. So don't beloved the differences. And yes, there are people who call themselves anarchists who are not anarchists. Anarcho-capitalists, ideas like that. People who are sort of make a lifestyle choice. Anarchism as a historical movement, very clear in what it stands for. Building class organisations to fight the bosses now, fight the politicians now by direct action and solidarity. And that way, we build a new world, we're fighting the current one, and we transform society. That also involves building things like cooperatives, housing cooperatives, food cooperatives, even cooperative workplaces to support the class struggle, not as an alternative to the class struggle. So in terms of the mainstream anarchist tradition, we're very clear on it. So in terms of what else to talk about, there's so much, and it's no time to do it.
Yeah, I do, because you've been a scholar of this. Could you go into a little bit the different splits within, or the different moments between within the history of anarchism and Marxism, the relationship?
Well, I mean, I had the key dates are 1847, when Marx produced the philosophy of positive philosophy, a disgraceful book which completely distorted Proudhon's ideas. I mean, misrepresented them completely, not an honest polemic. 1848 is now a key moment. Two manifestos were published that year, one by Proudhon, which basically advocated self-management, to manage workplaces, and basically prefigured the past commune. Another one was the Communist Manifesto, with its industrial armies and nationalisation, which obviously prefigured something else, like Stalinism in many ways. You have the fights within the First International, where the arguments were between how do we change the world. Do we organise at point of production economically, build unions, use direct action, federate workplaces together, fight it that way, or do we go with political route? Do we go for political action? Marx gerrymandered the Hague Congress and forced a position which was against what the majority of the First International actually wanted. So in terms of that's another key issue. Another key point is 1917. Obviously with the publication of State and Revolution, where not only did Lenin misrepresent Marxism, but he also misrepresented anarchism completely. I mean, like the notion that anarchists went away of the need to have a social organisation, the need to defend the revolution, it's all pants. If you read Bakunin, you read Kropotkin, it's all there. I mean, Bakunin was talking about workers' councils back in like 1872, and it's very clear on that. The next key point is 1918. Where basically within less than about 6 months since he's in power, the Bolsheviks were gerrymandering the Fifth All-Soviet Congress to secure the majority against the left SRs. You had basically a Bolshevik dictatorship within a year of the seizure of power. And if you want to talk about like big ideas, if you read State and Revolution, Lenin talks about, no executives. It will be a fusion. The Soviets will be a fusion of legislative and executive bodies. The first thing the Bolsheviks did was create an executive over the Soviets. That's the first thing, overnight. Within 6 months, they got rid of working class democracy in the army. They had basically started gerrymandering packing Soviets to secure party power. The next year, so that's 1918. Next year is 1920. Zinoviev proclaims the necessity of party dictatorship at the Comintern. And this is during a period when effectively the Civil War was over. They thought they had won. They had basically proclaimed to the world revolutionary movement, you need a party dictatorship. Trotsky was talking about the objective need for a party dictatorship in 1937. So it's a very key position. So in terms of one of the questions, it was, what is it? Is anarchism and Marxism a theory of freedom, a working class, of democracy? And in terms of Marxism's actual track record, all those are optional. Lenin said it was socialism.
What did you say there? I didn't.
In terms of it being a theory of individual freedom, democracy, basically the track record of Marxism is that's optional. So in terms of anarchism, basically freedom is fundamental. In terms of the fundamental ideas, individual freedom, collective freedom. That's why we're strong supporters of self-management, why we argue for the election, mandating and recall of delegates in our federal structures. We're very clear that power must rest in the hands of the people themselves, the people who actually have to live with the decisions. And in terms of our aims, it's a very integrated theory. It's not a theory of individual liberty in isolation. It's not a theory of collective liberty in isolation. It's interactive. You can be part of, it's a case of individual liberty implies self-management, free agreement, federalism, decentralization, getting power back into the hands of ordinary people like you and me. And that's one of the key things we need to be doing. I am a shop steward, what we call them union reps in my place. And the key thing we try to do is build up people's confidence that we can change things. The working class had been defeated for 30, 40 years. I mean, the poll tax was probably the last time it was a major victory. And so it's a case of building up that confidence, building up the very notion that you can change things, but even that you've got basic rights in employment, and that can be very difficult. So in terms of the left has failed. There's no denying it. Part of the reason why it's failed is because of the very traditions which we are discussing now in terms of the impact of Marxism. I mean, that's been a disaster for the working class. In terms of anarchism, has always been a minority in most countries, and it's the case here as well. We are very small. It's not denying it. I'm not going to pretend we're bigger than we are, but basically our ideas are strong, and we can change things, and we have the ideas to do it. When you talk to people about self-management, people like the people who are on strike, running the strike, they go, yes, that's just common sense. When you talk about you need to coordinate things, but you don't just send somebody off to do their own thing. You say, no, we tell them what to do. They listen to what we want, and they represent our viewpoints, and if they deviate from that, they're out, and we get somebody in who does what we're told. That's common sense. When you say you don't need bosses, you can run workplaces yourself, bosses, most workers will go, yeah, we know how stupid management are. You know, they make some crazy decisions in my place. And part of the role of, how long have I got?
You're about time to wrap up.
Oh, about time. Okay, in that case, what's the difference between anarchism and Marxism? Okay, the organisers of the London Anarchist Bookfair went to ULU, and they said, we're interested on hiring you. And he said, oh, no, you can't possibly, no, not interested. They go, why not? You believe in revolution. They go, well, wait a minute, you have Marxism, we have SWP, have a book, ULU. They believe in revolution. You know, it's like, said the committee, but you mean it. and that's sort of, it's like, we mean it. We talk about mandated delegates, all workers' councils, self-management, all that stuff. We actually mean it and we apply it. And we usually advocated it all first, not that you know that from Marxist accounts and anarchism.
Okay, thank you. And so finally, Dan Morley.
Okay. Well, I want to speak, try and be positive and speak about the perspectives for the future and how, on the basis of that, the left can recover its position, which I'm confident it will do in time. And obviously the position we're in at the moment, as we all know, is an incredibly deep crisis of capitalism. And the perspectives for capitalism over the next few decades are one of stagnation, growing inequality, austerity, mass unemployment, etc. I think most, if you read any serious economists, bourgeois economists, that's what they say, that's how they see the future of their system. And trust in capitalism and in its politicians is also at an all-time low. So to me, that suggests a perspective in the coming decades of heightened class struggle and political instability. On the other hand, as we know, and as the whole point of this discussion is about, the left is weaker than it has been for a very, very long time. And we are faced with basically the heritage of social democracies, which are utterly wedded to capitalism. And then, of course, on the other hand, spontaneous kind of movements that develop or one-day strikes that take place but then kind of fizzle out. And really the kind of theme of what I'm trying to say, or what I will be saying, is the need to recover a confidence in political ideas, and in particular in revolutionary ideas and a revolutionary perspective on the left. One of the questions that we've been asked is basically how we see the recent left groupings that have a sort of spontaneous character or leaderless character, if you like, and that have taken place in the last few years, and whether or not they're a challenge to traditional Marxist ideas. However, interestingly, the question also notes, very tellingly, that many of these movements, for example, I suppose the Occupy Wall Street movement or the student protest in the UK about 3 years ago, many of them have frequently betrayed quite a sort of frankly reformist or very almost unpolitical kind of approach with regards to the state or with capitalism. That they either tend to put forward very abstractly revolutionary demands like abolish banks or abolish money or all cops are bastards type of thing, which is, I suppose, is not obviously particularly practical, it's rather intangible. When they, on the other hand, speak in a more concrete way and put forward concrete demands, it's true, I have noticed these movements that we have seen have a rather naive kind of reformist outlook. In other words, just tax the rich, for example, which is obviously, I'm not against per se, but is not going to solve the problem. And I think that I wouldn't want to necessarily blame anarchism for this, because I think that a hell of a lot of Marxist organisations that have been involved in this stuff have been equally, if not more, guilty. But clearly, for one reason or another, there has been a loss in confidence in ideas on the left, and on the idea that you can advocate socialism and revolution. And I think that there's a sort of a narrowing of political perspectives that you see, and a very short-term sort of approach. I think that there's a fear of perhaps, certainly in Occupy, there was a fear of putting forward political demands, possibly because of an anarchist kind of tinge to the movement. That's debatable. For one reason or another, the idea, and you can see this in many other movements, even in Tahrir Square, other things, there is just a sort of very narrow and straightforward, we're just going to sit in this square and make a point and make it clear what we're against. And I think that is obviously the stage at which consciousness of these movements is at. It's very much a sort of rejectionist approach, very much we are against this, and that's it. And obviously, unfortunately, if that's the form our movements take, as much as I support all of these movements, in themselves, they will tend to fizzle out, because if you don't have a strategy and not making a clear positive political point about what you need to do to go forwards, then of course eventually people are going to go, well, I can only sit in this square for so long without any clear idea of what we're going to do. And what I would have advocated in that movement is the need for the movement, having caught the attention of the American working class, for example in Occupy Wall Street, and having been actually quite a lot of sympathy from the general population, take advantage of that and actually put forward a clear program of expropriating capitalism in order to, nationalize the banking system, nationalize the commanding heights of the economy. In other words, a revolutionary Marxist program. And actually advocate that be discussed in workplaces up and down the country, taken into the trade union movement, etc. Now, obviously, this is a very long and painful and difficult process in which the trade union bureaucracy is going to resist. Nevertheless, I see it as absolutely essential. And if we don't put forward concrete political demands that point to capitalism as being the enemy and socialism as being the solution, then, of course, movements will tend to fizzle out. Now, another question we've been asked is how can we handle the objective contradictions of realising these principles under conditions of capitalist life? Well, first of all, for me, I think we have to start out on the basis of clear revolutionary principles and of theory. Because, of course, as revolutionaries, we spend most of the time in a minority and being defeated, or where obviously 99% of the time there aren't revolutions taking place. And there is a hell of a lot of hand-wringing on the left about how much we have failed. And although that's true, I'm not really interested in doing that and looking at things in that way. Although we have to be frank about where we have failed, obviously. Because the issue to me is one of largely an objective situation where the working class was defeated and it takes a long time to recover its nerve. And obviously there are enormous obstacles in its way. And to me, it will be the self-activity of the working class through events that shake it and through successive stages of movements which have some success and then fail and then another stage, etc. Those are the things which will rebuild the left. It's not so much our approach as small groups of far left organisations. But on the basis of having clear revolutionary principles, we have to therefore intervene in these events as they take place and support them, whilst also never being cheerleaders for those, the goals. For example, if Podemos were potentially to win an election in Spain, or if there's a strike for higher wages, we have to support that. But we must never let go of our revolutionary ideas. We must never fail to point out that simply a strike for higher wages is not in itself enough. Capitalism as a whole system obviously will always take back any gains we make as and when it can. So that really is how I see things. There's another question when it says, do we want more or less state? Well, obviously I'm a Marxist, so I guess the implication is that I should say more state. That isn't really what I think. I think that we want a radically different kind of state, a worker state genuinely formed out of organisations in the workplace from below, actually real elections from below, forming a completely different kind of state. I don't really see it as more or less state, but just a different one. Now, there's another one, basically, has anarchism been vindicated over Marxism because of basically the crimes of Stalinism or of reformism? Well, certainly the question of leadership and of betraying leadership, which is the norm, to be honest, is a fundamental question for the future of humanity. Why the leaders of supposedly working class organisations systematically fail to represent their membership or fight on their behalf. That is obviously an absolutely enormous question, and in that respect, anarchism is absolutely right to point to that. For me, however, for me, the solution to that problem, I don't think that anarchism provides a solution. I don't think it necessarily understands the question of authority, despite rejecting it so consistently. So in my mind, the real reason that Marxist movements have failed, or Marxist leaderships have betrayed, or reformist leaderships have betrayed, is because of the pressure of capitalism. It's an incredibly hard struggle to fight against capitalism, which is obviously the dominant system globally. And so long as we have capitalism in power in its main centres on the world stage, the pressure to capitulate, to sell out, etc., will be tremendous. So to me, it's not really power in itself that corrupts, like automatically by itself, but more corruption from capitalism, from the ruling class on top of workers' leaderships, which I don't have enough time to go into that properly. Anyway, yeah, I think I'll have to leave it there.
Okay, thank you. So I'll give the panellists, if they want, a couple of minutes to respond to each other, and then I'll open up for audience Q&A. So, John.
Yeah, I just want to say this is where when you have these panel debates, I actually have more in common with the anarchists here than with the supposedly Trotskyist group, which is supposed to come from the same tradition. And I think this is one of the problems with the logic or the politics of sect. The thing about a sect is a very small group of people who claim they have the truth, and the logic of the sect is if everyone joins us, that is it, because we have the answer. And the answer is for everyone to join the sect, which is something that's never going to happen. The thing about also the problem with sects is that they spend all their time having to justify their existence, and they can only do that in opposition to other groups or other sects. So everyone else is wrong, and we are right. And the other thing about the sect is it needs to maintain a paper, full-time organisers, and this is very resource intensive, so that if you end up joining a sect, instead of actually fighting for socialism, you're spending all your time propping up the sect and actually not getting involved in class struggle, not actually involved in building movements. So any argument to me with a sect is just pointless and sterile. I mean, who cares who wins an argument between two sects? It's not a very enticing prospect of being the biggest sect. So I just don't waste my time with that kind of stuff. I mean, we could spend the whole day doing point scoring about, what positions AEW has. Do you accept the right of return for Palestinians to Israel? You could have all these point scoring arguments and be utterly sterile and a waste of time. So I'm just going to end it there. I'm going to say that actually. I find it very easy to work with anarchists most of the time in things like Occupy. I think there are differences between anarchists and Marxists, but those differences only become apparent in a revolutionary situation or a post-revolutionary situation, which we are nowhere near now. We're nowhere near that kind of situation. So I think it shouldn't really matter so much. The question of hierarchy and power, I don't think you can will away the question of power. I think it exists. If you're involved in organising something like an occupation, there's going to be a leadership emerging out of that, whether you like it or not. Whether you acknowledge the fact that there is a leadership or not, it exists. And it's better to be open about questions of leadership and to be accountable to the group. And I think that is a better way of actually. And that's, to me, what is real democracy. It is actually not ignoring the question of power, but actually saying power must be exercised in a democratic way. Those who hold power must be accountable, must be replaceable. The Tony Benn's 5 questions of power, I think, are very, very, very good. Okay. And I just wanted to say, what other point I want to say is that, for me, of course, the working class is the central agent of change. It is the organisation that can liberate the whole of humanity. But sadly, we haven't seen an example of a victorious class struggle, which has been on the scale actually to pose the question of human liberation. And I think that is why, the left is in crisis.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
I want to make 2 points, but first, you say, those in authority must be controllable and, blah, blah, blah. In the first instance, the problem is with your organisation. That's not true. Your leadership is not accountable to anybody except itself. In actual fact, you seem to be in the SWP by kind of an accident. You don't sound like the authentic voice of the SWP. Leaving that aside, 2 things. People have been moaning about ideas. Look, I think ideas are really, really important. I think moaning is tiresome, that's true. But a battle and contest of ideas is fantastically important. Isn't that what's going on here? Isn't that actually why we're here? To hear different ideas expressed and articulated, right? And to have people on the panel say, who cares? Let's get organising, let's get busy and produce a leaflet. Begs the question, what's on the leaflet? What ideas are you conveying, right? Ideas are important. So I follow Engels. I think there are three key struggles of the class, 3 key fronts of the class struggle: the industrial, the political, and the central one, the ideological. The working class is a slave class, right? It's in thrall to bourgeois ideas. These are the big dominant ideas in my school where I work in your university, in the books, in the newspapers and everything else. To liberate itself, the working class has to adopt and find a new worldview. Ideas are central to that, right? And the idea that we belittle them at our kind of, at our peril, it's ridiculous, right? So let's get, it's also, I find the demagogy in this kind of tiresome as well. Right, okay, let me make a case, final point. Let me make a case for why anarchism is never going to become a mass force in Britain, right? And I want to do this in a slightly perverse way, which is I want to contrast how workers struggle with our previous society's peasants struggle. Okay, look, if you're a peasant in a backward society, what's your basic high point of struggle? What do? You organise a peasant rebellion. You burn down the manor house. You kill the tax collector. You seize the local town hall and burn the records of who owns what land, right? It's a kind of anarchist revolution. Your main enemy is the state, right? Your main enemy is the state. However, what's the high point of workers' struggles? The high point of workers' struggles is entirely different. You take over the factories. You set up committees. You organise yourself, yes, against the state, but in the first instance, in your workplace against your bosses. It's a collectivist struggle rather than an individualist struggle, right? Look, the point about anarchism today, it is a marginal force, right? Working class socialism will rise again. Working class Marxism will rise again because it is rooted in the vast majority class. The anarchists are rooted in somewhere else, in kind of relatively marginal groups in society. The squatters movement or this and that movement, which is peripheral, right? That's why. Look, the only way forward now is through the collectivist struggle of the working class. Human liberation depends on that class, and that's why we should take it seriously. That's why it's central to our concerns.
Okay, thanks. And Tony, do you want to say?
All I was going to say is the peasants' revolt sounds a good start to me. I want to hear what these that I've got to say.
It was a while away, wasn't it? It was
Okay.
a time ago.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is I want to hear what other people have got
we'll
to
bring
say.
them.
Okay, I'll be quick. I always find it very refreshing to hear Marxists explain what I think. It's like, okay, take over factories. Where did I read that? Oh yeah, I've been Kropotkin and Bakunin. What did I read about organising the workplace? Yeah, Bakunin, Kropotkin again. These are basic anarchist principles. The idea of a peasant revolt has sort of been an anarchist revolt. If you read Bakunin, you read Kropotkin, revolutionary anarchists, the main battle is against the state and capital. To suggest otherwise shows you have never read an anarchist. In terms of demands, yes, okay, demands. Part of the problem as a legacy of Marxism, nationalising things isn't socialism. It's perfectly compatible with capitalism, and the net effect is producing state capitalism. The idea that nationalising things results in socialism is a myth. If you read The Bolsheviks and Workers' Control by Morris Brinton, he goes into great detail about how the Bolsheviks undermined worker self-management during the Russian Revolution in favour of nationalisation, and it effectively turned the whole economy over to the bureaucracy. That was the cells of Stalinism. In terms of the crimes of Stalinism, well, that's the problem. It's like, yes, the crimes of Stalinism were horrendous, but the crimes of Bolshevism were pretty bad. And in fact, until such time as the revolutionary Marxist tradition actually understands what went wrong in the Russian Revolution, it's not going to go anywhere. So in terms of, well, I'm a worker. I sell my labour. I'm a trade union rep. The idea that I've got some sort of inner peasant running around in my head is quite farcical, but that's the level of the critique. It's just pants. I mean, seriously. In terms of authority, Engels' on authority obviously brings to mind, but I mean, he's not writing that book in a working class perspective at all. He has no notion that the difference between agreement and coercion. He has no notion of the difference between making decisions and hierarchy. The notion, his view of revolution is not from a working class perspective. And it's just, I mean, in terms of understanding authority, yes, we use the word authority in a short term for authoritarian. If you think that making a decision equals authority, fine, you're wrong, but it's like making agreements is part of liberty. Collective decision making is liberty. It's not an authoritarian position. Okay. So in terms of that, it's a question of people then through struggle. That's the whole point. In terms of the idea of sort of having to inject socialist ideology into a working class who are crushed by capitalism, it's just patronising. People then through struggle, be conscious revolutionaries should be part of our class and work to encourage that process. Socialism is a product of working class life. Anarchism comes from struggles of ordinary people, as Kropotkin said. Okay. And that's what we should recognise.
Thanks. And Dan.
The only thing I would like to add is on the question of authority and leadership is that the way I see it is that leadership, first of all, is not the same thing as oppression or coercion necessarily. Obviously, in class society, where there's a rich and a poor and an antagonism like that, they coincide because the ruling class obviously has to lead through coercion in order to guarantee its profits, etc. But as I see it, that leadership is an unavoidable consequence of the complexity of social life. In other words, different people are at different stages of experience and consciousness. In a workplace, obviously some people are more militant than others, they're more experienced than others, etc. For example, you yourself, you say you're a shop steward. Now you can say that's not leadership because you are entirely delegated by your members and you have to do what they say. But there must still be a reason they've chosen you. It must be something that they feel more, you have more time, you are more articulate, you are more committed, whatever. There has to be a reason they've chosen you and they must need to choose someone, otherwise they would all go and negotiate together. And the way I see it is that if you extend that through into society, in other words, beyond just a single workplace, you do find that there are some layers of the working class and some types of people that come to revolutionary conclusions before others, that are more active than others. I would say this room in itself is an example of that, right? We are a minority. Those speaking on the panel are a minority. The people in the room are a minority. Most people are not doing this. They don't have the time, whatever. Many different reasons for it. What that means is that in revolutionary processes, those who have a particular idea of the need for revolution, or perhaps everyone has that idea, but some people have the ability, have articulated it more clearly or in more complete manner, they have a duty actually to explain those ideas and to set a date for actually an insurrection or something if others agree with those ideas. If you don't have a group organising in that manner, you tend to find actually that revolutions fizzle out. That although maybe a majority wanting revolution, if there's not a clear, identifiable organisation calling for it in a certain way, this is how we're going to do it, come and join us, it doesn't happen.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'll take questions now from the audience. Any side here? I saw this guy first.
I don't have a question, so I feel like people should ask questions first, but I think some things need a response.
Yeah.
As well
Okay.
as questions.
Would you like to give?
Yeah, I would. I'm really struck by two things I've thought for a long time, which is that my erstwhile comrades on the left suffer from a strange combination of nostalgia and amnesia. You know, and the nostalgia can be subjective about, you know, my experience of the left and how good or bad it was, or it can be a nostalgia about how good the class struggle was, and then an amnesia about my role in that, you know, what I did. The young, I hope you won't mind calling you a younger comrade. I'm older than almost everyone here, so I hope you'll forgive that. But to hear you describe the question of leadership and to skirt around the Leninist critique of the deficiencies of working class self-activity in that way, comrade, that's a kind of amnesia as well, because I know that you have read What Is to Be Done. And I know that you know.
And I don't agree with that. What Lenin says in
that. The real question that Lenin posed was the impossibility of working class self-organisation.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Developing into a revolution.
I'm not obliged to agree with every sentence of Lenin.
Let him finish first.
But you know,
I do agree with it.
This is the Bolshevik.
You'll come in again in a minute.
The question isn't actually whether the Proudhonist theory of exploitation is correct or the Marxist theory of exploitation is correct. Okay? The question isn't actually about whether anti-Düring is right or whether, you know, Guy Debord is right. The key question is whether the working class of their own resources can develop beyond the defensive trade union consciousness that you see in the workplace into a form that can struggle for their liberation and the transformation of the world. And the anarchist answers yes.
Okay.
And the anarchist not only says it's possible but necessary, because Bolshevism demonstrated over a century that when the ideas of the revolution are imposed from an external source, from the bourgeoisie, Lenin suggested, it's a dismal failure. So let's not, I don't think we should skirt around it. That's the difference between us. I think the AWO comrade there, and I probably agree about more on that than anything else we agree on, that it's about that.
Okay, thanks. There was one other question here, which I'll take now.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to the comment here. You'll find that if you actually read Lenin beyond what is to be done, he actually revises what he says in that quote. that he cites from Kautsky in What Is to Be Done. He does it repeatedly, as early as 1903, actually, at the Congress of Social Democratic Parties, and he points out that he was just, well, first of all, that he was wrong, and that this fact that he was wrong originated was a result of him reacting to the Mensheviks, who were saying that that all you have to do is just appease to the condition of the working class at this moment. But what I wanted to talk about was this thing that the comrade here said about the solution is not joining an organization, this thing about a sect. And like, I don't think a sect for me is when you describe. For me, a sect are people who think that they are the center of the class struggle and that they're where history begins, right? Instead of knowing that the working class has its own activity. And I think we need to understand, and would agree with you, comrade, that the working class does not come to the Marxist Party. The working class left its own organizations that can even become revolutionary. The thing is that you can't kind of appease to this vague idea that we shouldn't have ideas in organizations. I think ideas in organizations are completely essential, and I don't think the anarchist comrades would disagree with me. I mean, the CNT, they carried out for years propaganda among the peasants, and that's one of the reasons why collectivization would have gone so smoothly in Spain.
Okay.
And they were very well organized. I don't think it's a very good argument for Marxists to make that anarchists are against organization. The central issue for me is the question of power. Because, you had the CNT, they were organized and there was a revolutionary situation, but what did they do when there was a revolutionary situation? They didn't call for the formation of workers' government or workers' councils to impose the will of the workers and peasants. Instead, they said, oh, look, we're anarchists and we're against power.
Okay,
and they lost the opportunity. Sorry, last point. And what happened afterwards? Because the state always has to exist inside class society. One second comment.
All right. I think we'll bring response.
They didn't call for dictatorship of the proletariat. What happened afterwards? The bourgeois government reformed, and they ended up joining the government with the Stalinists and becoming reformists.
Thank you. We'll bring the speakers back in now because we've got a lot to respond to there. Okay, Ian,
okay.
And then Mark.
My original talk covered that issue, and the sort of there's two things in terms of style, in terms of Lenin and what is to be done. A few years after what is to be done, he wrote a little article explaining how a certain comrade explained his ideas extremely well on the necessity of injecting revolutionary ideology into the working class, that comrade being Stalin. 12 years after what is to be done, Lenin wrote an introduction to what is to be done, a series of articles. He basically said, well, I don't have to talk about that anymore because I was right. So in terms of the idea he revised it, that's not true. He had plenty of times to say, no, that's not, I was being misrepresented. Each time he took opportunity to say, nope, spot on, that's my point of view. And he did that with a set of articles of Stalin. In terms of CNT, the analysis of what happened in Spain is extremely idealistic. It's a case of, ideas do matter. The ideas in revolutionaries' heads do matter because that influences the decisions. It's the same with Bolshevism, for example. Bolshevik prejudices and flaws influence the decisions they made. In terms of the CNT, 1936, yes, we had anarchist ideas. The anarchist ideas in question were you should smash the state and replace it by a system of federation of workers' councils. That was what was agreed in the Zaragoza 1936 resolution. That was what anarchists have been arguing since Bakunin. The question is, why didn't we do it? And the reason why we didn't do it was we were sitting there and the day after we defeated the army in Barcelona, basically going, we don't know what's happening in the rest of the country. We know that we've had a revolt against the Republic. If we go for libertarian communism, then we're probably going to have to fight the fascists and the Republic. And we were sitting there going, well, we don't know what else is happening in Spain. So we made a decision, and it was the wrong one. They didn't implement, they explicitly decided to ignore their own politics due to isolation, due to the situation we're in, objective factors.
Okay, thanks. I'll bring you back in again.
One more sentence. If you like, basically, the difference between anarchism and Marxism failed because they applied their ideas. The CNT in Spain failed because they didn't apply their ideas.
Okay. Mark wanted to come back, and then I'll take Tony and then John.
The CNT failed because it collapsed, because it split, because the people that denied the state, Durruti and co., walked off into the wilderness and were the victims of a bourgeois state, and because the rest of the anarchists collapsed into the bourgeois state. That's why you can't, you can deny. Like you talk about Bakunin in the run up to the Paris Commune, there were a whole series of insurrections in France. Right, one of them, Bakunin was on the site in Lyon, right, and the state was very momentarily scattered. Bakunin turned up with a few of his friends, signed a declaration saying the state is abolished, right? The state, however, didn't recognise Bakunin's declaration that the state was abolished, and pretty much very quickly came back, right, and dispersed Bakunin and his friends. Bakunin fled abroad and missed the Paris Commune. Now look, you can deny the state if you want, but the whole point is the working class needs its own state to defend itself in the same way, exactly the same way, as workers need a picket line to defend their rights economically. The worker state is just simply a generalisation of the picket line. Right, final thing is I find no need to apologise for Lenin. I mean, look, what did Lenin say? About this, and this is a question about working class consciousness and what it's possible for the working class to achieve in terms of development of its own consciousness in and of its own movement. Look at Portugal 74-75, which I've been doing recently, or France in 68, the biggest general strike in human history, 6 million workers on the streets. Look, workers were approached, for instance, in aeronautical factories, in shipyards, in car factories. What do you want in France in 68? Repeatedly, they rebuffed the bosses and they said, basically, we don't know, right? Workers are capable of enormous movements. They're capable of approaching, in their mass movements, the idea of a new society. But frankly, having been dominated for decades previously, right, their ideas in a mass movement like France in 68 or Portugal, even Portugal for a year or 18 months from April 1974, are underdeveloped. In order to do the job of destroying the bourgeoisie and replacing it with human liberation, right, the working class needs something more sophisticated than we don't like the past. It needs a clear view of the present. It needs a clear view of its own situation. It needs a clear view of what it needs. And that is why a revolutionary party is required, which is part of a kind of an engagement with the working class mass movement, not an imposition, an engagement with the working class movement that said, look, we have these ideas on offer. How about this? Right?
Thanks.
That's the idea.
Tony.
Yeah, just coming back on 2 or 3 things. I think the guy here was talking about leaders and an anarchist being a shop steward. As an anarchist, we need people that are going to take responsibility. If I'm going out into the fields and we've got to pick up all the crops, I'm not going to be leading. I want someone to tell me how best to do that. That person, for that time, becomes, if we want to call it, a leader. But they're not a leader all the time. If we're coming to do something else, then that person reverts back and someone else has got the knowledge and goes forward. There is a difference between people taking responsibility and leadership. And I will only speak from the anarchist perspective. I think people need to take responsibility. They have to be recallable, but they're not leaders. I think there's a slight difference. We're organising. Anarchists organise. Well, hopefully anarchists organise. There are anarchists that don't organise, and I wouldn't necessarily call them anarchists. I think they believe in the theory, but not the practice. Organisations, slightly not, you have to have an organisation of people. When it becomes the organisation is more important than the politics, I'm just not sure about. The other last thing is, I can't speak. I'm guessing I can just about speak for the other 4 people here. We're all workers. You're saying that, the workers are not educated and they need this revolutionary party. I'm a worker. I've been a worker all my life. I started off as quite a sort of. I was born up in a fairly right-wing working class family, and you develop ideas and you learn those ideas. To say the working class need a leadership, I have problems with, because I think the working class are very educated and know what's wrong, and given the chance, are a lot more fucking clever than most of the politicos I know. And I just think
that's true.
This whole idea that we have to lead the working class because we have the ideas. I don't have the ideas. I love anarchism. I believe in it. I'm not saying I'm right. I want to sit down with a load of people in Haringey and work out what we do. I want it to be a discussion. I don't want to tell people what to do.
Thanks.
So I can't go along with that last bit.
Thanks, great. Just to bring back John quickly, and then I want to take some more
Well,
questions.
I think anarchists and Marxists or communists believe in a stateless, classless society. That's what I believe in, and that's what anarchists believe in. It's the same thing. We might differ about how to get there, but I want the same thing as anarchists want. The question of organisation and Lenin, yeah, you can read what is to be done, but he also revised his ideas repeatedly. He believed in full-time committee men, full-time professional revolutionaries were to be the leadership of the organisation. And in 1905, he changes his position and says the committee men should cede control to the radicalised workers. And then he changed his position again in, in 1914 and 1907 when he broke with Kautskyism. And then, he thought like the Bolshevik form of organisation was suitable only for Russian conditions. And then after the revolution and with the Comintern, he said, no, this idea is applicable to Western bourgeois democracies. I think we can learn a lot from Lenin, but I think his ideas in the current context are very difficult to apply. The left has had 60, 70 years since the war to apply his ideas, and has not been very good at doing that for some reason. I don't know why. Well, we haven't built a mass revolutionary party with hundreds of thousands of workers. There is no such. To me, that is a Leninist party. A Leninist party is a mass party with a leadership and with membership of a few 100,000 workers. That to me is a real. It's the kind of party that we should have, but we don't have, and we need to ask why we haven't succeeded in building that. And I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay.
But I just want to say the question of the state. Now, the question of the state. Now, this is where also I have some differences with anarchist comrades. I believe that the state is a highly centralised organisation. It is very good at putting down revolts of workers or the masses. And why is it so successful? It's because it can coordinate centrally. And this is another argument for a revolutionary party. We need, if the workers are to defeat the state, they need to create their own state. But that state, only purpose of that state is to defeat the capitalist bourgeois state. And once that is over, then it must dissolve itself because it has no other reason for existing. So I do believe in a worker state, but only as a means of destroying the capitalist state, for no other reason.
Okay, thanks. So I've got a question over here, and then
I guess it's addressed to Iain mostly. Okay, people have mentioned Spain, but it just seems I once was I would have described myself as an anarchist communist, sort of more on the good of Pannekoek end than Proudhon or Bakunin, but part of the reason I became very alienated from that is because basically the history that, in that sense, the kind of milieu around there is inheriting sort of Lenin, the middle class misleader, all that kind of stuff, seemed to involve a lot of situations where everything would have turned out fine if all the anarchists hadn't been killed, and that strikes me as a fundamental problem with anarchism.
We die.
Anarchists time. Like, okay, 1917, there are anarchist groups in Russia. What do? Half of them back the Bolsheviks, the other half back various other little coalitions. They are not an independent force in it. Spain is the same thing. And Spain, it matters more because there's 3.5 million of them, right? I'm making that up. It's millions of people. I just don't see that, when you try and keep yourself clean and stay away from, forming type organisation, and to keep away from state power and that kind of thing, actually, you're staying away from the levers that allow fundamental change to happen. Party organisation is precisely what allows collective decisions to be really meaningful on a national, indeed global scale. Briefly on the Lenin stuff, I mean the point with the socialist kind of coming up, that he's arguing against people who don't think workers can understand high politics and overthrowing the Tsar and stuff, and that should be left to the liberals. It's actually an argument in favour of serious political engagement. It's not about lecturing people and say, you do this because I'm so clever. Workers will tell you to fuck off, as you well know. You go up to them and say that kind of thing. It's about arguing with people with the generous assumption that they can be won over, or that you can be won over. That is worth arguing with people.
Okay.
And I think that's
Could I respond?
Okay. Can I take one more question, and then because we did you have a question? No, you had a question.
It's just all right.
Okay. Did you?
Yes.
Yes.
So I just this is addressed to Iain, and but it's just I have a bit of a problem with your logic, in that and this is just maybe the way you presented your argument, in that Marxism failed because the Marxists who have engaged in political change failed, or have done this. And I think in that same vein, you could argue that anarchism is a failure because every anarchist attempt in history has produced naught. In that, because you're arguing for the workers' ability to self-organize into a revolutionary force, when we have 150 years of the same result, if you will, is that the workers, in absence of a Marxist leadership, for example, since maybe 85, we have 30 years of no self-organization. I mean, that you could argue that in terms of the neoliberal condition, or the depoliticization of contemporary society, but we still have this kind of moment where the lack of any kind of vanguard or leadership party in society has created the conditions for self-organization.
Okay, a few points. In terms of the lack of a vanguard, I don't know if there's plenty of vanguards out there. I mean, there's shitloads of them. I mean, like I was reading one this week where apparently the only reason we didn't have a general strike in socialism because because of the trade union bureaucracy, and we had the Revolutionary Workers' Party was there to have a trained, organised leadership, waiting to seize the levers of the trade union movement. So there's plenty of parties out there. In 1968, there were plenty of Trotskyist groups. Didn't work. In terms of Spain, like the idea that Durruti went into the wilderness. This is what Durruti did. He helped organise workers' militias to go to Zaragoza to stop his comrades in the CNT being shot in a bull ring. That's going into the wilderness. Working class self-organisation to go and fight the fascists is described as going into the wilderness. This is the level of debate we're having here. I mean, this is farcical. In terms of the worker state, okay, if we were having this argument in 1864, I could understand that, this is quite theoretical, but we have an example. We have an example of worker states. We have a Bolshevik revolution. We have a situation where a worker state was created. And based on vanguardist principles, based on Lenin himself being in power, and the net effect of the worker state was that it was shooting workers, it was breaking strikes, it was basically attacking the working class. It was gerrymandering Soviets, it was packing Soviets. When workers went on strike to protest, they clamped down on the workers. This is before the start of the Civil War. So in terms of the notion of a worker state somehow will only repress the bourgeoisie is nonsense. It's empirically wrong. We have evidence to back that up. In terms of what happened in the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik party became alienated and isolated from the working class. They had a choice. They could either support Soviet democracy or maintain party power. Leninist ideology, because the working class apparently can't quite reach socialist consciousness, has to be introduced from out with. The net effect of that is, the workers are disagreeing with us. Okay, we represent the higher interests of the working class. What should we do? Repress the working class because they become declassed and influenced by bourgeois ideas. And by the net effect of that was by early 1919, they were talking about the necessity of a party dictatorship. In 1920, Zinoviev proclaimed to the world revolutionary movement that the dictatorship of proletariat was the dictatorship of the party, full stop. In 1923, the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party and its 25th anniversary of the founding of the Bolshevik Party, the social democratic movement, had the latest sort of thing saying, oh, the working classes had different levels of consciousness. You need a vanguard party to seize power. And the dictatorship of the party is the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's what we were arguing. Ideas have consequences. The notion of the vanguardist position privileges the party. The so-called worker state is a centralised organisation, hierarchical. It produces a new class which views the working class as the new servant class. That's what happened. All this happened before the Civil War broke out in May 1918. So in terms of, I can understand having this conversation 100 years ago, but we've got experience. It's a question of, do you learn from history or do you repeat from history? Anarchists recognise mistakes have happened in terms of the CNT. We have, we explained and analysed in great detail. If only the Bolsheviks, the people in the Bolshevik position actually understood the basics of their own definitive revolution, we'd be in a better position. So in terms of, we have the evidence to back this up. And anarchism has failed. We are not living in an anarchist society. I agree with you completely. However, look at it this way, we are less wrong. Okay? And by taking part in the class struggle, we will become, we ourselves will be educated as part of that struggle. Anarchists have never said we have all the answers. We have ideas and suggestions which we take as part of our class. We are part of the working class, we are workers. Obviously, there's a division in terms of level of class consciousness. No anarchist has denied it. The question is, how do you interact in a way which you do not privilege a party, you do not privilege, basically end up saying, oh, the working class disagree with us, the working class are wrong, therefore we must shoot them to maintain power. That's the difference.
I'd like to ask the other panellists for their sort of understanding of what dictatorship of the proletariat means to them.
Okay. The dictatorship of the proletariat I understand as workers' democracy, i.e. to the exclusion of, the bourgeoisie and other things like that. And out of the democracy from below, the formation obviously of higher structures from workplace elections, etc., that coordinates the process, but is subject to recall from below.
Okay. And anyone else want to?
I think, well, why is it called I think Engels or Marx used to call it the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat. And why is it called a dictatorship? Well, because it's a coercive force. It is designed to have the monopoly of force to remove the power from the capitalist class, and that can't be done peacefully. It can only be done through force of arms, and that's why it's a dictatorship. It's a coercive force, and that's why once it has served its purpose, it needs to go. And that's why I probably differ from other people on the left who think the state has a role to play in a society in which the capitalist class has been completely destroyed.
Anyone else want to?
Sure. I mean, I think part of the problem we find ourselves in as Marxists is that many of the basic ideas and words of Marxism have been hollowed out and been given a different content. It is reasonable in many ways for a mass of people to be alienated by the word socialism, because if socialism means a fascination with Bulgarian tractor production and the gulag and everybody wearing grey suits, then people are right to be disgusted with it, and that's what it's become associated with, and in many ways kind of justly. So we tend to use, in Workers' Liberty, words that we think have become least damaged in order to convey the same ideas as the original Marxists did. So we call our paper Solidarity, which is a good word, which has not been as damaged by Stalinism and the Stalinist experience as many others. I personally tend to use the word socialist as little as possible because of its associations and connotations. And we call ourselves Workers' Liberty because that's what we want. It's a programmatic demand. It is Workers' Liberty, if you like, is the dictatorship of the proletariat in different words, in modern language, in language that we actually that conveys the meaning that we entail, the meaning that we think Lenin and Marx wanted to convey with dictatorship of the proletariat. Dictatorship as a word is just ridiculous. You can't use it anymore. It doesn't convey what we mean. However, I think that, look, we've got to get away from it. Look, if you want to replace the capitalist society and the capitalist class, which in Britain is fantastically coherent, is extraordinarily sophisticated, is malleable, can bend when something hits it, is very used to dealing with all sorts of conflicts the world over, not just in Britain, right? Then it's a very, very difficult job. As I say, its central task is ideological, right? It's about persuasion. It's about the working class fitting itself out in one way or another to be capable of running a future society, having a clear view of itself and knowing what needs to be done, right? Now, look, the idea that capitalist class are just simply going to give up and disappear is ridiculous, right? There is no evidence to possibly suppose they will. The working class, even in power, will have to defend itself, right? Now, you can, I don't know, I'm calling that a state. I referred to it earlier as a picket line generalised across society. Now, unless you deny the absolute impossibility of authority being democratically constituted, which just seems to me to be ridiculous nonsense, right? A religious idea, right? Or you can conceive of an authority which is vested in workers' committees, which can meet very, very regularly, right? Which hold its its officers accountable, which subject to recall without any privileges, who rotates them regularly, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about workers' state. We're talking about the workers having a coherent organisation to defend itself and to reorganise society in its own interests. In other words, in the interest of the enormous majority. What's the problem with that, right? Obviously, the idea that we're conceiving this as Stalinist is just ridiculous. I'm not a Stalinist.
So,
see you were.
one there and one...
No, you just implied it.
Okay, so you'll have to forgive me if I don't use big words. I'm just a humble carpenter. I'm working class. I self-identify as an anarchist, and I don't read too much into the history of these different political sects, whether they be anarchism, whether they be Marxism, socialism, any of those things. I work with the world that's around me. The world that's around me, it strikes me that more and more of my people, and I use the term very loosely, my people, they're more anarchistic in mind than they are anything else. Because we're sick and tired of these territorial pissing matches between Stalinists, Marxists, whoever. We're sick and tired of this, much in the same way that we're sick and tired of the pissing matches between party politicians. All of this argument is just wastes time. We need to find a way of making our actions not reactionary. We need to be building something better from scratch. I don't really know where to go with this. It sounds like a bit kind of fragmented, but that's all I've got.
Thanks. Dave?
But my one question is, like, on the Orwellian meaning switching around dictatorship as a proletariat, I find that quite disturbing. But the concept of a workers' state, when it's in such a the organisations on the left, the Marxist left currently, have such a view of the working class that is quite behind what exists in the world at the moment. And so if their workers' state was built on the trade unions that we have at the moment, and as you admit yourself, it's a coercive force, what happens to everyone who is not this industrial working class that has disintegrated so greatly in our current state of affairs?
Okay. There's one.
Yeah, it just seems to be, in the past 5 minutes, just seems to be a bit of a historical tour. As scientists, we're supposed to learn from history and put those ideas into practice about how we organise society and how we want the future society to come about. But we're all in groups, and we all seem to be in our little silos as scientists, much as reflect as university scientists. We're all sort of drilling down, becoming smaller and smaller until looking at a tiny microscope, but we don't actually see the bigger picture about what's going on. At the moment, so even now we're not speaking the same language to each other. It's very different. Society, if the working class or whoever's out there, not us, if we were ready for a revolution, and I think they would be ready, there would be actually self-organising. But obviously, the ideas which we're sort of pumping out, then they're not catching the attention of those out there. You know, people are naturally, you know, I've just read to prepare for this sort of session, I read Kropotkin's Mutual Aid, and that's, you know, it goes through the history of how people organise, they organised in the past. You know, it just seems like common sense, people come together. You know, anarchists could say that's anarchism, communists could say that's a communist way of organising. You know, those are quite sort of recent words, which we just attribute to people who just do things commonsensically. But I mean, but what mutual aid actually just shows me is that, you know, the interference of the states when people actually do come together. And I don't think we can get away from the states in terms of how we actually confront the state and overturn the state. You know, Occupy does show something good in terms of raising up the issue of democracy. We do need democracy. We do need to organise on a street level basis, but we do need to come together, I think, as a party. You know, how do we overturn society? You were talking about we need perhaps an armed militia. I believe in an armed militia. If we're going to face the state, we need to face the state with guns, with our guns. We need to train our own army. The only way we can do that is by having a party, organising a militia, and having, you know, be ready for when the actual time comes to bring out the revolution.
Okay, Sasha was waiting for a long time, and I forgot him earlier on. So
thanks. My name's Sasha Ismail. I'm part of the same group as Mark, Workers' Liberty. Just before I make my point, a very quick announcement. We're collecting signatures for the release of 2 Iranian socialists and trade unionists. One, funnily enough, one is a syndicalist and one is a Marxist. But they're in prison. We're collecting signatures to get them out. I'm going to pass a petition around. If you could sign, that'd be great. If you don't want any information, don't tick, and you will never hear anything else about it unless you look it up. But please do sign the petition. The points I want to make are, like, firstly on the unions. There are socialists who think that the unions as they currently exist are really good and there's no problems, or some of them are, like for instance the Socialist Party and the way they see unions like the RMT. But no one here today has argued that. And nor has anyone argued that the working class is just male white workers in factories. So I think that's kind of a red herring. There's a much wider discussion about the changing nature of the working class and the changing nature of workers' organisation. But I kind of think all that is a red herring. So my questions are, firstly, and I'll try and deal with these questions. Firstly, is it true that the left spends too much time arguing with itself? Because it strikes me actually there isn't a lot of debate and argument on the left. I mean, I've got to congratulate Platypus for putting on meetings like this, because generally different left tendencies basically refuse to debate with each other. I mean, in Workers' Liberty we've got a lot of experience of inviting people to debate us, and often, not always, the answer is, of course not, why would we do that? And I think that is part of the culture of the left that's a problem. You see, and Mark mentioned, you see that in the student movement too. The idea that, you know, when those leaflets were burned at the Scotsman's General Meeting, people were denouncing the idea that people would give out leaflets. That's part of the wider problem. So it isn't that some people are debating and other people are doing organising. I think people know that's not true, and I think from John that's just a bit of demagogy. But what do you think about that? Second point, do you think that a revolutionary movement has to prefigure a future society in terms of being democratic? What are to what extent does it have to, and to what extent are the limits on that? And in particular, I would like to know what the comrades who are members of the SDP and the Socialist Appeal think of that, because I don't think their organisations are at all democratic. And I mean, particularly, I know more about the SDP. I mean, the idea that someone could be a member of the SDP and come and talk about democracy, given what has gone on recently in their organisation, seems to be absurd. Nonetheless, there is a general, this isn't just a bit of demagogy for me, there is a general question, to what extent does a revolution movement have to prefigure a future society? And the last point is, I think that, I think it was Iain made the point about the relationship between fighting for reforms now and developing more revolutionary consciousness. And I think he's right to raise that, but I think for me the point is that Marxism has a more coherent set of kind of hooks and levers and ideological frameworks for doing that. People have talked about that in a post-revolutionary situation like Spain, but it's also true, for instance, if you look at the unions. I mean, it's good that Iain's a shop steward, but in general, I think you can't deny that anarchists stand aside from the unions, including anarchists who claim to be anarcho-syndicalists. I mean, anarchists, you know, for good and bad, and often it's for very bad, Marxist groups are much more the force in the actual labour movement. And, you know, you get groups of like 6 people, and they'll have 6 shop stewards, and they'll be very active, and they'll, you know, whereas anarchists seem to generally stand aside from it, and that isn't a coincidence.
Okay.
So the best Marxists are about transforming the labour movement. Anarchists might sometimes use that language, but it seems to me you can see quite obviously in reality. I mean, it's like the Green Party. Just finishing this. Green Party has what, 10,000 members? Nothing in the unions, basically. Anarchists, very similar.
Okay.
Except they have 10,000.
So I'll let everyone. There's been a lot of points raised, but if everyone could respond to some of the questions that have come up there. Maybe John, do you want to start first?
Okay. Me. What?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll go.
Well,
sorry.
I mean, this will only take us. I'm not going to respond to everything because I don't. Well, some people didn't even ask questions, and anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. But Sasha kind of partly said what I wanted to say. But this point about the trade unions as they are now are not going to form a workers' state, or wouldn't be a good workers' state. I completely agree, but I don't advocate the trade unions as they are now. The trade unions will be transformed through struggle, maybe even broken up new trade unions. Who knows? What I would say about that, and about also Sasha's point about anarchists in the trade unions, I agree with Sasha, and I think that I once debated an anarchist at the beginning of the meeting. He was a syndicalist. Someone came up to him and said, "Oh yeah, you're an anarchist, but you're not really in the trade unions, are you?" And he got really offended. He was like, "Not in the I'm a syndicalist." And it turned out that he was he had formed a union in a single workplace, which is not obviously a bad thing, but that was it, and that his organisation had no relationship to any other union other than that. And I think that the point is that the unions are in a very bad state in terms of their democracy and their leadership. That is, although that is a fault of those leaders, it's also fundamentally also an inevitable outcome of the ebb of the class struggle. That's what we always have to bear in mind, is that the working class doesn't actually self-organise most of the time. Most of the time it is on retreat or is just demoralised. And in those situations, no matter how good your ideas, inevitably the trade unions are going to be under a right-wing leadership, under the control or heavy influence of the capitalist class. And that's the reason. So when the workers do self-organise, which I believe they do, it's in waves of revolutionary struggle, and they will come about again in this country. I believe what's happening today will precipitate that. And finally, also Sasha asked if socialist appeal is democratic. I don't know what grounds you have for thinking it's not. I think it is profoundly democratic. We have annual conferences every year. We don't exclude anyone from, we don't expel people for disagreeing with the organisation. Every branch has the right to discuss all of the documents of the organisation and move resolutions and stand for office. That's really all I can say on that.
Okay, I'll bring John back in now, and then.
Yeah, I just want to say, knife twisting exercises don't really get us anywhere. You can always snipe at another group. It's very easy to do. So at the moment, the flavour of the month tends to be the SWP organisation. I'm not pretending it is an organisation without faults, or that clearly all organisations have defects, but I think really the points I want to relate to are what the comrade said about the Occupy movement. And to me, the question about revolution, it's so far away from where we are now. I think we should talk about getting simple things right, rather than revolution one day, but right here and now. Just to give you a concrete example, yesterday I was at the student demo, and we have a left in this country which is, and there is anti-austerity movement which is totally fragmented. And a kind of metaphor for that was when the students smashed into the square in Parliament Square, the barriers. They just broke through it quite easily. They got a lot of energy and they can do that. The Occupy movement, if they had changed the date and coordinated, they could have broken through there, and we could have occupied it because they weren't interested in staying. Small things like that. Why can't we? These are the things we need to be getting right. We need to be able to coordinate on the streets better and be more effective. If we had a movement which had the mobilising power of the TUC march that we saw on the 17th of October, with the kind of shock troop effectiveness of the students, combined with the staying power of Occupy, we would have quite a formidable street movement which could actually, really put the question of on the national media that there is a mass militant movement against austerity in Britain. And if we could couple that with, really good effective strikes on the 24th of November, which really did hit, and not simple tokenistic efforts, but really all out to win, we'd be in a much better position to be talking about revolution than the situation we're in now. And I think really we should, before we talk about revolution, we should start talking about getting the ABC. We should start learn to walk before we can fly. And I think that's where we're at.
Okay, right. Okay, prefiguring the future. Yes, the struggle for freedom is the means by which we become used to managing our lives, become free. So therefore, I think it's very sensible and very, it's always been an anarchist position, is that you organise in a way you envision a free society would work. You'd workers' control of their own struggles and own organisations prefigures workers' control of society and the economy. You, by actually organising yourselves, making your own decisions, you become fit for freedom, essentially. Anybody who says that's not the case, I think is talking nonsense, because obviously, how do you become, so how can you live in a self-managed society if you're following party leaders or trade union bureaucrats? You can't. You have to organise yourself in a way which expresses your principles. Simple fact, I think. So it's the way workers' control is for now, in terms of our struggles and our way forward. In terms of, so that's very clear. And I know if I did my original talk, I would have said that during it, because that was one of my key points I was making. In terms of anarchists within the unions are very bureaucratic, very top-down, centralised. I spend a lot of time just arguing with elected officials, some of whom consider themselves revolutionary Marxists as well. It's like, and you just sit there going, banging your head against the wall thinking, for fuck's sake, what is wrong with you people? And it's very difficult. Anarchists are involved in unions at a local level, and we consider it as far more important as building class confidence at the base. And what comes out of that will determine it. Getting people elected into hierarchical positions, probably not a good idea, because ultimately it's the base that counts. It's empowering the base that matters, and that's what you have to build. So people, you encourage self-management, break down trade union barriers. If you've got Unison and Unite and UCU in one area, you organise workplace meetings, get everybody involved, break down those barriers, get people empowered at the base, organise them and bottom up, and that's a key principle of anarchism. In terms of, as I said at the start, it's like the difference between ideology and theory. Theory is when you have ideas. Ideology is when ideas have you. And I've raised some quite significant points in this discussion about the actual reality of, say, the Bolshevik state, in terms of what actually happened. And instead of actually addressing that, we get little fairy tales about how the dictatorship of the proletariat is actually a wonderful democratic thing. And we get fairy tales like, oh, the ruling class won't just disappear. Who said they would? I mean, like, seriously, no anarchists, no revolutionary anarchists have ever said, oh, and the next day the bourgeoisie will all disappear. Nobody said that. Bakunin, Kropotkin, a bit arming of the people. They said it. They federate, the communes federate, the workers' associations federate with the militias, defend the revolution. And Marx, in one of his attacks, mocks this idea. He basically says, oh, you let those areas, overreaction areas, all work by themselves. And he's like, oh, for Christ's sake. It's like we're having two different discussions here where basic fundamental points are just being ignored because it doesn't fit into the ideology. And that's very frustrating. You're having some complete straw men going on, and it's frustrating. And that's part of the problem with the left. And it's like, you point things out, you go, this is what happened. And you go, okay, I'm going to completely ignore that and talk about how wonderful the dictatorship of the proletariat is, and completely ignore what actually happened when it was applied. Fine, if you want to do that, fine. I feel like I'm talking to management. I have arguments with management like this, and you point out fact after fact after fact, and we just go, do. And it's like, fuck's sake. So it's frustrating. I'm frustrated. I'm sorry for swearing, but I get frustrated. So in terms of what we're doing here, I think in a way, this is very good, this meeting. It's very good to hear all this stuff. But it just shows you what a state the left is in. And to be honest, I despair at times. But the key thing is that we need to work together, and I think we could work together on the basis of self-managed, direct actionist, economic and community-focused organisation, and which would encourage sort of working class combativity to basically build solidarity, build that counter power, the social power of the working class, as we could in terms of it. But sadly, I think that any such movement would basically we had an example, we tried to organise a rank and file thing in our union, and the revolutionary Marxists managed to basically alienate everybody and killed it dead. And it's very frustrating, warring from within, literally. So in terms of going forward, what can you say? The key thing is, though, learn from history, don't repeat it, and build a new world where you're fighting the old one. That's
we've got 10 minutes till 9 o'clock, so I was going to take a couple more questions.
Is there any chance I can speak?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
go Tony.
I won't. Anyway, I want to come back on some of the other guys asked questions and some of the other people have raised points. You were saying ages ago, and I was trying to respond, about anarchists fighting in a revolutionary situation, in a war, basically. And I accept with John, we're miles away from it. I think there's big problems. We don't have a strong leadership in a war situation. Possibly is quite good. The anarchists don't want that. I think there is problems about working out how we do that. But I would always come back to, once you have a leadership, I can't ever see that leadership's giving up power. So I think we need to look at other ways of doing it. The guy here was saying something again ages ago, and I was trying. Anarchism and Marxism, socialism is not doing very well. Capitalism is a dominant force within us. You can hear from up here, there's people who are meant to be sort of on the left together, moaning at each other. I think coming back on something the guy up here was saying as well, it's like, if we get to and it's a very big if, we get to a revolutionary situation, none of our views, me included, are arguing for a fairly down the line, this is the way to do it. Hopefully I'm up for letting we have a wider discussion, and I don't say I know all the ways, but most of us have got this down the line, this is the way it does. The revolution, if it happens, is going to happen. It's going to be a bit of this and a bit of that. It's not going to be necessarily the dictatorship of the proletariat or this or whatever. It's going to be moving forward. It's going to be working in a way and going off in different directions, and there's going to be problems, and there's going to be fuck-ups, and there's going to be good bits. The idea that any group of us can determine the way a revolution is going to happen is pie in the sky. It might start off anarchist and become Marxist. It might start off Marxist. Let's say it might become anarchist and become fascist. I didn't want to accuse Marxists of their thing going into fascism. I think it's really going to be messy. And to think that we can put this line on it, I'm lost. The guy up here was saying, why don't we have more discussions like this amongst ourselves? My time and everyone else's time is limited. I've nothing against anyone on this platform. I know where all of us stand. I don't want to have a discussion with one of us. I want to get out on the streets, in workplaces, in communities, and start having that discussion with other people. And if it means every time I have a discussion like this, I'm missing a meeting in Haringey at the moment that I'd really quite like to be at, but I wanted to come along to this. But I'm missing that meeting because I'm here. So we have to prioritise. And I don't want to prioritise having this discussion with politicos. I know, and I've known John for years, and we get on. We're not going to change each other's minds. I can get onto the street and do stuff where maybe things are going to be different. But I just think we have to look forward. Like the guy said up here, I haven't read many books. I'm not very good at reading. It takes me fucking ages to get through a book. I don't know all the different philosophies and who's argued what. What I want to do is look how we move it forward. And when I look at the left, and it depresses me, all we do is argue with each other. And it's not a debate. It's point scoring. If it is a debate, then I'm happy to have that debate. If it's point scoring, let's move on. As a working class, we've got the shit being kicked out of us daily, and we push forward our own little programme. And I think we need to see beyond our own groups, and I include myself in this, and look where we can work properly with people like ourselves who are not getting a very good deal at the moment. I just think we need to move forward.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I've really valued having these different perspectives here today, so that everyone in the room can listen to them and reflect on them, and might not agree with all of them, but maybe it will go some way to transforming it. Though I want to bring in some more questions and then make the last comments, the kind of rounding up comments of the panellists. But I'll bring in a couple more questions now, and then we'll round up. So, David, you had a question?
My first, I've got two points that are kind of connected. The first being it's to do with Occupy and the Occupy movements. And someone made a point about sort of why didn't. Well, I wanted to ask, why didn't the Occupy movement, when it was getting so much mass media coverage around the world, what went wrong, and why didn't it engage with in a more widespread kind of working class action that could have built a movement? And the second point is mainly addressed at the two people representing the kind of anarchist tendency, which is that to me you seem to be arguing a completely different line from each other regarding how to think about history, and like whether to learn from history. We've got John is
Iain.
Sorry, Iain. I feel like you're saying that we really need to learn and do as much research to figure out exactly what went wrong, and I can understand that. But then I also understand this other approach, which is like there's so much history, we would never get through it all. We just need to kind of live in the present a bit more as well. But there's I don't know if they're really like if they can work together, or in what way, and in what way the other panelists maybe relate to learning from history in the broader sense. Or other possible, maybe alternative like ways of learning that are not quite so.
Okay, I think that's a really good question to finish on. So I'm going to finish on that question and get people to respond for their last comments on that question.
Yeah, just want to say, I really agree with what Tony said. I think for those of on the left, we should really need to re-examine our priorities if we're spending all our energy point scoring rather than trying to win new people toward an organising resistance to this massive, unprecedented assault on working class people. We're losing the NHS, we've lost tuition fees, we've got record numbers of people going hungry. I mean, I'd rather be organising resistance for that. I think there are far too few people like Tony. We need hundreds of people like Tony or me or you. Just organising resistance, just, who know the basic politics. On the question of, why did the Occupy movement, why is it the way it is, and why didn't it exploit its full potential? I think that's an interesting question. I was involved in the original occupation in outside the London Stock Exchange in 2011 in October. I camped out there for a month. The thing is, the people who got involved in it, a lot of them were completely new to politics. Also, people had different understanding of what the crisis was and what the solutions were. You had all sorts of people with all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas. And so you get one person saying it was, it was the banks, and then another person next day will be interviewed, it's the shape-shifting lizards and the Illuminati, and you got all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we should be too worried about that. Russell Brand is an interesting character. He did an interview on Newsnight. It got something like 10, 11, 12 million hits. He's a guy that openly talks about revolution. And I think there is a big audience there. There are millions of people who want to overthrow the system, and they're really frustrated and they don't know how. They don't know how. And I think somehow we need to reach out to them and get these people organised, get them all together, talking to each other, and then we could build something. And I think that's what Occupy is trying to do. That's why it's trying to occupy a space. Because if you occupy a space, everyone knows you're there, and everyone knows that's where you can meet up and discuss things and organise things. That's why the state doesn't want us to meet up in big squares. It wants to close off the city so that we can't organise. And I think we need to do that. I think we need to reach out to these people. And we need to spend less time sniping at each other and more time speaking to people that want answers.
Okay. Mark?
Okay, just a few quick points. I mean, firstly, it's true, I think, to some degree, that your points haven't been answered. So I propose the way we deal with this is we should fix up a debate at your convenience in the next few weeks, and I and other people will debate you on were the Bolsheviks right? And if people don't think that's an important question, they cannot turn up. I think it is an incredibly important question, and I would urge you to do so. So let's just deal with that with another debate, right? However, you listen to what this guy's saying about the state, right? He sort of talks about the arming of the people. Okay, let's think about the arming of the people, all right? Okay, if you're to confront capitalist reaction across a continent, right? It has to be more than a Goldsmiths militia. They have to be organised. Do you want your organised militias a law unto themselves, or do you want them accountable to a democratic authority? In which case, the working class should control, through its own democratic institutions, its own armed power. Now that's a state. Yeah, that's a state. You might not choose to face up that fact, but that's what we're talking about. Okay, the question about sniping. Look, there is a degree of right. Okay, it is not. On the one hand, it is not sniping to complain about the SWP, a regime which has recently brushed under the carpet 2 rape allegations from women in the most disgusting way possible, which gave fuel to the women that banned the SWP in Goldsmiths yesterday evening, right? That's not sniping, that's real, right? It's important, right? And just to simply dismiss it demagogically as left groups point scoring is just ridiculous, right? And the sort of things that Russell Brand's is interesting. Russell Brand's a bourgeois twit, right? And we need nothing to do with him, right? And it's part of it's a symptom of the crisis of the left, right? So we should discuss the crisis of the left and try and, through our own engagement with ideas, right, discuss what the crisis of the left consists of, right? It is not, I mean, no doubt any discussion, there are things that you think, oh yeah, they're going a bit over the top and stuff like that. But what we're doing tonight is important, it's a big deal, it's interesting, which is why everybody stayed, right? It's because of the ideas that are being conveyed. So I think we shouldn't apologise for that, right? Now look, but the problem is, surely is that a lot of the comments are becoming, from the comrade here and the comrade over there saying, okay, well, what we need to do is we need to sweep away some of this debate and we need to build something better. But what better? We need to put out a leaflet, but what's on the leaflet? We need to do something. We need to resist. Yes, but how? Doing what? Saying what? All these things are organisational matters, and they're all subordinate to politics and to rational discussions and fundamentally to ideas. So we need to get our ideas straight. And it's not a counter-position between working. Look, I work in a school. I came here from negotiations with my head teacher. I'm very active in the movement. I do stuff. I don't just spend my time arguing about ideas. I do that because it's important. I do both. The whole point is to combine the two. Now, isn't it true also that what we face ourselves, we've been talking about the crisis of the left, we haven't really properly addressed it, aren't you struck by the intense negativism of the left? How hostile it is even to advanced capitalism, how, fuck fees. What an ignorant slogan. Yeah? Tell me what you want. In my union, fuck Gove, get rid of Gove. All right, we got rid of Gove, and we've got another bloody Tory, right? It's not good enough just to say what you want. You have to articulate a positive vision of what you're for. Where does this negativism against advanced capitalism and negativism against... It comes from Stalinism, fundamentally. The left has been corrupted by Stalinism. You think about the Stalinist project and the way it impacted on British and European politics. It basically said that any damage to your capitalism, to your advanced capitalism, was good. It was on our side. It was positive. It was for us, right? It's wrong, and so you have organisations at the moment campaigning against the American bombing of IS, which, if it stopped, would annihilate the Kurds, right? People don't think things through. People aren't rational and responsible and coherent, right? We need to be rational, responsible and coherent, and we need to talk about things. And finally look, if you think about, I want to just reflect on this idea about a revolutionary party, because it's an idea, it's a kind of conspiracy of, I'm going to tell you all what to do, yeah? Me and Sasha over there, yeah? We're going to get you and we're going to tell you what to do. Look, what we've been doing here is, in embryo, actually what we do inside the class, what Workers' Liberty does inside the class. We are contending for a point of view, a vision, a set of ideas, right? That's all the Revolutionary Party does inside the class movement. And so in May 68, for example, what was lacking was a coherent political backbone, right? An organisation which could articulate a point of view, which the working class could then think about and reject if it liked, right? It's not a trick. It's not a Stalinist pose. It's not violence against the working class. It's an argument, a living argument inside our movement. That's what we're doing.
To answer the questions, I think you've got to have history, and I think you've got to have theory and practice. I think you've got to have history and today sort of thing. I don't think it can be one or another. I'm probably more practical, Iain's probably more theoretical, although Iain should speak for himself. But I think you need both. So I don't think it's necessarily one or another. I just tend to spend more time out on the streets doing stuff than reading books. Maybe Iain does it the other way around. But you were saying about Occupy. I haven't really got much time for Occupy. I think Occupy failed and it succeeded. I think Occupy got an issue raised. I don't think Occupy ever could go any further than that. I think, I went and spoke at Occupy down in London. And I remember when there was what was the RTS banner? Capitalism
is crisis.
Or something like that. And there was people down in Occupy saying, we don't want a banner having a go at capitalism because we want to be all inclusive. And I think that's one of the problems with Occupy, in that it tried to be everything and include everyone. And I think one of the other problems with Occupy is I don't want to see a load of activists come together and meet in a square. I want activists to be in their workplace, but I would also say in their community, and we haven't even talked really about community-based stuff here, because all of us have three things. It's like work, play, and where we live. And I think in all of those places, we need to be politicising. Whether it's down the pub, whether it's playing football or netball, whether it's in a swimming club, I don't know, whatever people do in their leisure time. There's that whole thing with your neighbours, and I blame a number of anarchists around this. Most anarchists don't even know their neighbours. They talk about community-based politics, or we set up this sort of decentralised stuff, and they're scared shitless of talking to their neighbours or saying, I'm an anarchist. And I know socialists that are the same, because they're happy to go in a meeting like this, and that's not having to go at anyone here, and talk politics, but then they might talk football to their neighbour, but that's about it. And it's like, if we're not in the community as well as in the workplace and where we socialise, we're nothing. So I think we need to be there. So I think Occupy actually have to go back and work with people they live around, rather than all activists coming together in a big point. But saying that, Occupy also got news coverage, and although news coverage is not necessarily going to bring about a revolution, it's not the same crap that's on the telly every night, and there were some people saying some decent stuff, and the majority of the working class follow the mainstream media, and if you can get stuff into the mainstream media, and I don't like Russell Brand, but just Russell Brand using the word revolution, if that word gets used 20 times in a day, it starts getting into the psyche. I don't think the rest of his stuff, I think he's a self-publicist. I think he will drop out when things get tough. But we nearly have to get back into the media. Just that whole drip thing of socialism, anarchism, Marxism, revolution, workers' control, workers' struggle. They've just died in the whole media. And that's not to say we don't have the discussions, because of course we have to have the discussions. But we're fighting a multi-billion-pound huge organisation called the media. and we're not making a dent with our leaflets, even if our leaflets are saying the right thing. And I think we need to, we need to look about what we do.
Okay, Occupy, yes, ditto. It's a case of raising the issue, but case of moving into occupying workplaces, occupying communities, making it relevant to, for want of a better word, ordinary people, which is not a good word to use. In terms of the different dialogue, again, ditto. Everybody's different. Some anarchists are more interested in theory, some anarchists are more interested in practice, and we work together. And so sort of division of work. So it's just because I read more books than him doesn't mean anything, or vice versa. It's like, we all contribute in our own ways. It's like in a free society, people will be interested in doing X, Y, and Z, or people will be interested in doing A, B, and C. They're all contributing to the cooperative commonwealth, same within the movement. So we're on the same line here. In terms of point scoring and so forth, the state is not the only form of social organisation. It's a specific form of organisation which has evolved to do a specific thing, which is to impose minority class rule. It's organised, it's evolved the structure to allow a few people to boss everybody else around. That's its evolutionary history. That is what it's evolved to do. In terms of the notion you could have a new kind of state which does the opposite, well, it's not really a state then. It isn't. In terms of arming the people, again, as I said plenty of times already, and I'm really sick of having to repeat myself, anarchists have argued for a federation of workers' councils and a federation of workers' militias to defend the revolution. That's been the standard of revolutionary anarchist position, and I'm sick of saying it. The CNT organised that, the Makrovists in the Russian Revolution did exactly that. So yes, they were defeated, no denying that. Ultimately, the CNT militias couldn't handle the combined might of Italy, Nazi Germany, and the fascist military in Spain. But they made political mistakes, no denying that either. In terms of the notion of, the worker state will be this democratic organisation where it's, the workers' militias, Red Army, will be used only to repress the baddies, the minority of their own class. That's not what happens. The SWP claims to be democratic, and that's disputed. But imagine if the Central Committee of SWP had access to arms. Right, think about it. Look what they did with the rape case. Just think of them in charge of millions of armed troops, which was the case under the Bolsheviks. In terms of the Red Army, the Red Army broke strikes. The Red Army broke up Soviets. The Red Army repressed the working class. They arrested socialists, people whose only crime was to say, maybe the Bolsheviks shouldn't be so dictatorial. Maybe you should have some workers' democracy. They were arrested. And so in terms of, we have a successful learning from history, we have an example of a worker state run by Lenin and Trotsky. And did it just repress the bourgeoisie? No. Did it secure a party dictatorship? Yes. Did the leaders of this worker state feel sorry about this? No, they advocated party dictatorship openly, repeatedly, at the Comintern, elsewhere. Trotsky, all through the 20s, was talking about the necessity of a dictatorship of a party. This is the reality of what we're talking about. The state is an evolved structure. If you create another centralised body like the state, but put the word workers in front of it, it's not going to work. You need a new form of social organisation, a decentralised one, a federal one from the bottom up, which is based on self-management. And I'm sure that's what most of our Marxist comrades think is the worker state, and they'd be wrong. The history of the worker state shows they're wrong. There is an alternative, and we have to pilot it. And yes, let's get away from negativity. Let's think about positive things and going forward. And hopefully, discussions like this can help clarify how we can do that. But part of the problem is we have to learn from history rather than repeat the mistakes.
So it's down to you to defend the Bolsheviks.
Okay. Well, first of all, before I do that, I think Ajmal wanted to make an announcement probably about the Marxist Society that there is at Goldsmiths, but he wasn't able to speak. I don't know if you see him at the end.
If it's okay. Yeah, we've got a reading group going now. At the moment, we're just reading a bunch of textbooks. I think soon, within the next 2 weeks, we'll have a proper society running. And we'll be holding regular meetings weekly, and it hasn't been decided what day yet. and it'll be on a broad range of relevant topics, including, for example, maybe Marxism and anarchism, but or like this about the student movement or whatever. So it'd be interesting. Just like go on Facebook, put in goals with Marxist site if you're interested.
Okay, with regards to the Bolsheviks, which apparently is fallen to me and no one else to defend, I would say that Marxism starts out from a materialist philosophy, which is that everything is determined by its material context, and one cannot just criticise the means that someone uses, the political policies they have pursued, etc., outside of a social and material and historical context, which unfortunately is what you have done. You've just listed a bunch of bad things, right? But the point is that they took power in an incredibly impoverished, backward country, invaded by foreign armies of imperialism, in a desperate and dire circumstance. And in those situations, you cannot analyse the decisions people took, the sort of the political form of their organisations and the extent of democracy or lack of it, as if it was just a free choice, as if it's just like, well, let's just do that. It's somewhat akin to. I think you guys have spoken quite a lot, to be honest, and I think I should be able to, actually finish what I'm saying. And the meeting's probably running overhead. So I think that that's always the context you need to put something. You could say that you could isolate a statement someone makes in a war where they advocate shooting people and give the impression that person's generally in favour of shooting people. It doesn't mean that. It means you're in a dire life or death struggle with world capitalism, which is putting unbelievable material and military strains on a struggling state which has just been born and is a completely new kind of state. Those are not the conditions we envisage socialism being built in. We envisage socialism being built in advanced capitalist countries, taking power in those countries with infinitely greater resources, infinitely more educated and active working class with far better conditions for it to participate in politics, and with far less social and material antagonisms because of the higher level of production. Anyway, I think I can't really do justice to that topic in a couple of minutes. That's all I can really say. The only one thing I want to end on, which I think is really to address the whole point of this meeting, which I'm not sure has been entirely addressed by a lot of the speakers. And a lot of the speakers said a lot about not being negative, but then proceeded to be exclusively negative in everything they were saying. I'm not interested in having a go at the other people. I want to talk about this question of how I'm not interested in complaining about the left either and hand-wringing about how awful we are. I'm interested in how we're going to rebuild. And I don't fundamentally blame the left for the situation we're in, although massive mistakes have been made. Fundamentally, it's the vicissitudes of the class struggle, which is an incredibly difficult thing to fight in for the oppressed class. And if we represent the oppressed class, we will lose most of the time. Rosa Luxemburg said every generation of revolutionaries but the last loses. And that is the reason why we are on the back foot. And sorry, I forget your name. You made an interesting. I generally liked a lot of your contributions, and I thought it was interesting what you were saying about we're losing the battle against the medium. We can't. No one reads our leaflets, kind of thing, which is obviously generally true for all of us as a generalisation. But the point I would think is that we're not really going to get into the media by some particular. It's not a question of finding the right recipe to do that. It's not like, oh, if we change our leaflets in this way, put a bit less theory in or a bit less Marxism in or something. It's going to be the class struggle, which is independent of ourselves. The class struggle will take place. It does take place. It is beginning to heat up in the countries of Southern Europe, which is also incidentally where you see new left-wing formations, which are massively inadequate, but still nevertheless, new left-wing parties reflecting vibrancy from below and changing debate in Spain and Greece. You see that happening, not because of groups like us, but because of the struggle of the workers and the changing consciousness that's taken place there. Our job is to participate in and help that movement and try, like the guy from the AWL said, try to put our ideas into that movement if the workers will accept them. And obviously they won't necessarily do so. We're not going to make them do so. We can only try. That is the perspective. And why Occupy failed, it comes down to the fact that there was no political content to it. And I think, again, what you said was right. It was trying to be everything, right? Trying to be totally uncontroversial and include everyone at once. It would fizzle out on that basis, and it did fizzle out on that basis. There's only so long you could be in a square with just because you're generally against things. You need to then go and do other things. You need to launch a campaign. And I think the Occupy movement in America, in one of its mass assemblies, should have launched a set of political demands for the nationalisation of the banking system under workers' control, the expropriation basically of the major monopolies, which are actually hated in America, despite the the kind of popular conception of Americans as being so right-wing. But Americans in opinion polls show that they hate big business and they hate the bankers, and that is the way to go forward.
Can I just say one brief thing about the rape alley? I'm not in any way trying to duck it, but if anyone wants to talk about it, you're more than welcome to approach me directly. That's one thing. The second point is Lenin said something very interesting once. He said, those who expect to see a pure revolution will never live to see it. We will never have a pure revolution. It will be made, if we have a revolution, it will be made with people who think like Russell Brand, with all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas. Now, with all sorts of contradictory and complex ideas. Those are the sort of people, they won't be like us. They will be like ordinary people, and they will think like
Russell Brand, ordinary people.
Okay, hang on, wait. I just want to say one other thing. It's that if you enjoyed this panel event tonight, and I think it's been like a productive conversation, please do add your name to the list so we can let you know when we've got future events coming up. And we also have a reading group on Monday nights, so just to say that. But I think we're going to have to. We're going to go to the New Cross Inn now. If anyone wants to come and join us, we can continue the debate there, because I don't think we can continue much longer now. Thank you. Thanks.